Hey there, friends. Welcome to the Being Brown and Bold podcast. I'm your host, Jess Thomas, and we are so glad you're joining us for all these amazing conversations about stepping out of our comfort zone, being bold, and taking chances. Today, I am hanging out with Keith Sarasin. He is a renowned chef, culinary expert, and cookbook author who has dedicated over a decade to studying the art of Indian cuisine. With a deep passion for the food and culture of the Indian subcontinent, he has honed his skills through extensive research and study. Sarasin is the author of 4 cookbooks that offer a wealth of recipes and tips on topics such as meat cooking and preparation, the art of dehydration, and seasonal recipes using the freshest ingredients from local farmers. In addition to his books, he is currently filming a documentary-style show, Finding India, which chronicles his personal journey as a chef from overcoming tragedy to rediscovering his passion for cooking. Keith also hosts Aatma, a one-of-a-kind pop-up restaurant that offers a unique tasting experience showcasing the vibrant flavors of the Indian subcontinent using modern cooking techniques and styles. And the way I know Keith is from a podcast he recorded during the pandemic called More Than Masala, co-hosted with Ragini Kashyap as they walk through the world of spices, which you have to go back and listen to because it is amazing. Keith, I am so happy and grateful to have you here on the podcast today.
Oh, I'm so honored. Thank you, Jess, for allowing me to be here.
Yeah. So tell us about your name, because if I didn't see your face, I'd be like, is this like family Indian? Because your last name sounds Indian. So how do you say your name? How do you pronounce it properly?
Sure, it's Keith Sarasin, and it's actually French. So yeah, my family is French, roots all the way back to France, and it's a crazy journey that a white French guy from the New England area is here today.
1,000-foot journey, though. You've seen that, or 100-foot journey.
100-foot, yeah.
No, that's your story. I mean, it's not your story, but like French and India, I think it's a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah, it's been amazing so far.
Tell us about yourself. What does it mean to be you?
Yeah, I think what it means to be me, which is a very hard question, right? But I think if I were to say today in context, it means being a perpetual student for the rest of my life. I've studied food from the Indian subcontinent for the better part of 16 years now.
Wow.
And the road to get me there has been really exciting, and I'm sure we'll get into. But the most important thing I think is I am always going to be a student. I'm dealing with a culture and a tradition that I wasn't grown, I never grew up in, and I have such a deep honor, love, and respect for it. And the more that I get to know, the more I go, man, it's going to take me 20 lifetimes to ever scratch the surface of it.
I am Indian, and I feel the same exact way. Every time I learn, even like I'm from the state of Kerala, and even within Kerala, there are some things that I grew up with that I meet a Malayali, they're like, I don't know what that is. I'm like, how do you not know what that is? And then they'll say something, I'm like, wait, I've never heard of that. So yeah, there's so much to learn, but I feel like it is a really fun journey in the learning.
Yeah, and to me, that's the beauty of it, right? Like, if we knew it all, this world would be a very sad and depressing place. But even that we get to every day learn something new, to me, just I love that. Love learning.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so you told me you're French. A lot of the guests on the podcast come from a brown culture, and you obviously do not. But we all bring ourselves to the table, to the kitchen. So maybe you can share a little bit about your cultural heritage and background and how that informs your life and work.
Sure. So I don't have a big family. Growing up, it was just my mother and I never met my father. And so my mom and I were really, really close. My mom, we grew up very kind of poor in New Hampshire. And I remember kind of my first memory was standing in line for government cheese. It was this thing that, the government would pass out, food rations for people who were poor. And I really remember my first line. I was standing at this church, and I looked at my mom and I was like, are they going to give us some food? And she's like, yeah. And this old nun kind of leaned down and she said, God bless you guys. Here's some food. And it's weird when that's your first memory, because it really sets the tone for a lot of other stuff. So I realized from a young age that my mom worked so hard, but she didn't have a lot of those tools and privileges of being born into a wealthy family. So we were going to have to work harder. And so that was a lot of my life script growing up. And my grandmother was wonderful. She would cook only two things all the time. She would make lemon meringue pie, which is not French by nature. And she would make this thing called gâteau, which is kind of this pork spread that she would make for holidays. And it's funny because that flavor profile is like so entrenched in my memory that I still make it all the time. And it's the only thing that actually feels like home. So I
Mm.
learned how to cook at a young age because my mom wasn't able to. She would work two jobs. I was kind of a latchkey kid. I'd come in the house, and my first book I ever learned how to read when I was like right around, 7 or 8 was a cookbook. So I knew that from an early age, cooking meant survival rather than enjoyment. And I think that was kind of my life script in the beginning.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Did you have scholastic books in your school?
Yeah,
Did you
sure
get a
did.
cookbook
Yeah.
from the scholastic pile?
Yeah. I remember those, and my grandmother had these old like home like housewife kind of cookbooks that were on the top of our fridge. And I remember bringing my chair, like a kitchen chair, over and jumping up on top of the fridge just to pull them down because I just wanted chocolate chip cookies, and I figured I had to learn how to make them.
Yeah. Aw. So with that as your background, when you were little, what did you imagine your life would be like when you became an adult?
Yeah, it's a hard question because I think, when we're born into situations that are really tumultuous and trying, we're kind of taught not to dream very big.
Mm.
Um, you know, I I never thought I would own a home. I never thought I would be in a healthy relationship because I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't, food to me was this thing that we had to continue to struggle for. Money was always a struggle. So I think from a young age, I knew I had to fight. That was my thing. I knew I wasn't the most talented human being. I was smart, but I wasn't the smartest. So I knew I was just going to have to outwork everyone else. And so I think that was the thing that was bred into me. My mother was very independent. And so I think that was the stuff that was passed down, really from a young age. And I think really gave me the foundation which I grew the rest of my life on.
So, we now know that you're this amazing cook, but did you always want to go into culinary? Did you have any difficulties in choosing a vocational path?
Yeah, I never went to school for psychology, mostly because of the fact that I always wanted I wanted to or sorry, I never went to school for culinary. I never wanted to go down that path. Like cooking to me was something that I had to do rather than I wanted to do. My best friend growing up was a kid named Steve, and Steve was the chef. He was the one who taught me a bunch of things. He was a year older than me, so he'd get into a job and he'd be like, "Oh, come follow me." And so that's what I would do. I would follow him to this place, follow him to the next. And it helped me pay my way to go into school for psychology, which is really what I wanted to do. So I went into school for psychology, had an undergrad in systematic theology, and that was my life. Like I wanted to be a marriage and family therapist, but I realized I was really kind of handheld in the sense that I school was so expensive. I mean, books alone were so expensive, and I didn't have a lot of scholarship money, so I kept working. Go to school in the morning, at night, pull that 8-hour shift. And so it wasn't until much later in life that it switched for me. My friend Steve, we were friends for so long, and he ended up moving to South Carolina. And one day, he's like, "Hey, bud, like, how's everything going?" I'm like, "Doing great." He's like, I want to let you know that, like, man, I just haven't been feeling well." And I was like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And so our friend group got together on a chat, and we talked about it. And we're like, "Maybe you should go to the hospital." And he didn't have insurance. And so it was one of those things where he kept putting it off. Long story short, he got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And it kind of rocked my world. And so when I flew down there to his appointments, I'd cook for him and he'd be like, remember that chicken dish we used to do? Can you do that? Remember this chili thing that we used to do? Can you do that? And that was the moment that food stopped becoming this thing that was a necessity, and it started to become this thing that was healing and bonding and created this deep sense of love. And Steve passed, and that was a pivotal moment in my career where I said, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to cook.
Wow. That's really hard.
Yeah.
So you got into cooking in this grieving process, well, longer term, but you also got into Indian food through that same grieving process. Maybe share a little bit about that journey.
Sure. So it's funny, growing up, I had a friend named Saprit, and his family owned this Indian restaurant, and he'd always be like, come try food, try this, try this. And I always loved spicy food. And that was my misconception. Indian food equals spicy food, right? And complete myth. But I always had these things where I was a picky eater. And so one day Saprit's like, I'm going to force you to try this. So my first bite of quote unquote Indian food was a Goan dish, chicken vindaloo. And I remember that moment so well because it changed the course of my life. I remember thinking, how are they doing this? This is packed with flavors that I couldn't wrap my mind around it. So the next day, he needed some spices for his family, went to this little kind of hole in the wall spice shop. And to the back of the store was this tiny little Gujarati lady. And she said, you need some help? And I'm like, I sure do. And she's like, you want to try something? And I was like, I'd love to. So she brought out this vegetable dish. At the time, I had no idea what it was, but suji sabji. And same thing. I was like, this is just vegetables, but it tastes like love. It tastes like, and it's hard to like quantify what that means. And it's hard to articulate that. But at the end of the day, it just hit this nerve with me, this moment of my soul. And she said, hi, my name is Indira. And I approached Indira every single solitary day for about 6 months and said, please teach me to cook. Please teach me to cook. And she would say no. So finally I convinced her. And it was, I think about it I think about it a lot, where Indira was a very hard teacher. She was very much like, I washed rice for 3 months. She would never let me into the kitchen. Her kitchen was, I'm a fine dining chef, so my background is very meticulous in the way we label things and do things. And it was just controlled chaos back there. And I would chop onions wrong to her. I would put in too much jira, cumin, and she would be like, it's just, she never said 1 tablespoon, because that's not the way that it was passed on to her. It was always like, enough. And I was like, well, how much is enough? And she's like, enough. She would do these hand gestures. And it's not until much later that you start to understand culture and you start to understand the way that things are taught, that it connects with you. But over the course of time, I spent about 6 years with Indira, a little bit more. I've known her for many years. And she became kind of like a mom to me in so many ways. My mom would come and visit her all the time, and she loved Indira. And then my mom was diagnosed with cancer as well. And when Indira, my mom was going through treatment, and Indira was starting to close her store down to finally retire. And she would always say, "Do you sure you don't want the store?" And I was like, "I don't know anything, Indira." And she's like, "You know more than you think." And then my mom passed, and I always say, Indira was, when you lose a parent and you don't have a big family, you think of these moments where your parent meets a person that you care about. And Indira was one of those. Some of my friends were those, because that parent becomes a memory that only exists in your mind, right? Like, it's like they become this ethereal being where you tell legacies and stories of this person, but the people you meet after your parent passes will never know that person. So Indira became this deeply profound and wonderful individual who gave me my passion for food from the subcontinent.
Wow. It feels like almost like providence of having people take, your mom took care of your heart, your friend took care of your heart, and they took care of your heart in different seasons where your soul just needed to be nurtured. And food keeps calling you back to it, but it's not about the food. It's really about your soul being taken care of.
And it's funny, when I started when I started, getting myself out there, and fast forward a bit, when I created our pop-up concept, that's exactly why we called it Aatma. Because the one scarlet thread throughout all of this was the connection of the soul. And it really became the truest expression of myself at that moment. And still to this day, there's nothing in this world like to me that connects like food from the subcontinent. I always say, like, I'm never going to cook dal as good as your auntie. It's just like, I can't do it. And I make a really good dal, but it's that love and that attention that Indira would say constantly. She'd look at me and say, you're not putting enough love in this. You're angry today. And I was like, this is like Mr. Miyagi level stuff, but she was very profound in that. And she was accurate. The love that we put into the food is the same love that somebody can taste.
Tell, for listeners who don't know, what is the definition of Aatma?
So Atma is Hindi or Sanskrit for soul. It really translates to the maximum expression of oneself without form or identity.
That's right. I don't know if you knew, but like when I had my personal chef business, the tagline is food for the soul. And so that's why it's just soul food on Instagram, because it's all encompassing. And wow, give me chills.
Me too.
So as you've encountered different cultures, because your Indian friend was not Gujarati, right? He was from somewhere else.
Yeah, he's Maharashtrian. So
you had a Marathi friend, you have this Gujarati mentor, and you keep encountering different people groups within India. How has that influenced your food and cooking?
Tremendously. I think, as a Westerner, I can't overstate this. Like, I had to unlearn everything I knew about cooking. I had to go in like as humble as humanly possible, because there's over 5,000 years of recorded history from the subcontinent when it comes to food. When I met my teacher, Kurosh Dalal, it was the same sort of thing. He's an archaeologist. And so he would talk about the depth and brevity of this cuisine and the history. And it's very humbling. I mean, I live in America. We have 300 years of it, there's 5,000 there. So I think the most important thing that I had to learn was to kind of be humble, and to kind of put my head down and really learn and listen. From there, I started meeting people, just like you were saying, from different parts. And the biggest lesson was how food from the subcontinent changes every 30 kilometers. I say subcontinent a lot if we include Pakistan and all of this, but to specifically focus on India for a minute, being from Kerala, you have the Konkan coast, you have all this rice culture that, a meal is almost incomplete without rice. And when we're in the West, we think rice is Uncle Ben's rice. It's a minute bag rice. Yet there's 500 plus varieties in India alone. From Sona Masuri to Siraga Samba rice to like basmati to like all these beautiful varietals of rice. I didn't understand that the bottom coast is rice and coconut and beautiful things like that. And in the top, you have this wonderful tradition of dishes like dal bati from Rajasthan and this wheat influence. So to me, the hardest thing was understanding geographically how certain states are located and what that meant for the food culture there.
Because it's whatever's grown. Like the rice that grew in my dad's backyard is not, what is this rice that people say is from Kerala? Oh, I'm blanking on the name. But when I buy that rice here at our Indian grocery store, my parents are like, no, that's not the rice, because it was a different variety. Or even, I'm now drinking chai, which we call chaya, because it depends on what part of India you are, what language you're speaking, it's called different things. And we grew up having zero spices. Actually, it's not even I grew up in America with my parents making this with no spices, but they didn't grow up with any tea. They grew up with coffee, because coffee beans grew in their backyard, and they are roasting their own beans and making their own coffee. And in our research, I found out that masala chai wasn't even a thing until like the 1940s. So it's not this, masala chai itself is not this ancient Ayurvedic drink. Like we have ancient Ayurvedic drinks, but there wasn't tea leaves in it.
Right.
And so, yeah, we keep learning. I know a lot of people who have eaten Indian food at Indian restaurants in America. I was teaching a chai class to this one woman, and she's like, I'm not really big into Indian food. I'm like, tell me what you've eaten. She's like, well, I don't really like curry. I'm like, you're coming with me. We're going to a restaurant. So for listeners who don't know, in your research, what is curry?
Yeah. So it's funny. When you said that, like, part of my heart hurts, and I'm not Indian, so I can only imagine people from the subcontinent. I'm sorry so much. Curry is interesting. It's an anglicized word. Basically what it means is there's a Tamil equivalent to it, and it's kari, Kari. And that definition of curry in Tamil can translate to any dish that is veg or non-veg. It can be dry. It can be, a vegetable heavy dish. It tends to have the properties of curry leaves. That's the only trace that we can find to the word curry. The reason the modern context of curry exists is 100% because of the British. When we think about it, the British occupied India for many, many, many years. But the problem is the British palate was very, very bland. And so what would happen is as all the spices were introduced to them, they started getting so excited. They were like, imagine having bland food and then all of a sudden spices hit you. It happened to me most of my life, right? So I know the passion in which it exists. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so they wanted to take that flavor of India home. And so they created curry powder. If you go into an average desi home and you say, Auntie, show me your masala daba, where's the curry powder? They're going to go, nahi hai, we don't have this
Right.
At all. Curry powder is a British and very Western invention. And the unfortunate side of it is now curry became synonymous with Indian cuisine. And it's unfortunately due to, there's a book that Hannah Glass wrote in the 1800s, and that was the first time the English word curry came to be. And now a lot of pubs, and you look at the UK, and clearly what Indian food has done for right, wrong, or indifferent, because there's a lot there. But regardless, I think that the biggest misconception about Indian food is it is all curry, because clearly it is not even remotely. I wouldn't say 50% of it is curry based at this point,
Yeah. And I know for us at my house growing up, when we said curry, we meant sauce or gravy.
Sauce, gravy, yeah.
So because we had other words for other dishes. But whereas other people will use the word curry as a generic term for like lots of things. Have you seen the Netflix episode on curry with Ugly Delicious?
Yep, so good.
I was like, when people really want to learn at a basic level, I'm like, go watch this curry episode with David Chang, and like he hangs out with all these people who like give the different interpretations of what it looks like. Because curry worst.
Yeah, exactly. In that episode, Vikram Doctor is on, and Vikram is one of these people who wrote for Indian Express. He's one of, in my opinion, the four real pillars of food historians that are still in existence in India. And like his writings have massively influenced like the way that I look at food. He did a podcast called the Real Food Podcast. And I highly recommend anyone who hears this, please check that out. It is life-changingly good.
Oh, if you can give me the link, we'll put the links in the show notes. So
you got it.
I want to find out about that too. Besides food, what is something, as you've encountered different aspects of Indian culture, what is something joyful that you have discovered in the culture of the subcontinent?
There's a phrase in Hindi, and I apologize if my enunciations are off, but Aditi Devo
I don't know.
Bhava.
I speak Malayalam, so
Yeah,
you're good with me.
Aditi Devo Bhava, and it basically means the guest is of God.
Yes.
I think about this phrase a lot. Like in the West, in the fine dining world, hospitality is a very important thing, right? You're spending a lot of money to go out to dinner. The hospitality better be top notch. But there's that, and then there's the culture that's inbred into people, into Desi people, of this guest is the incarnation of God. We want you to treat them like that. And I think that changed the way I looked at hospitality. I think a lot
Mhm.
of times as a chef, we get in our own head. We're in our own world. We're not front of the house. We're back of the house is what we always say. But we get wrapped up in our own world. And I think that from a cultural perspective, and again, this is just talking about one small section, Hinduism, where this phrase is kind of has its origins. But that phrase helped me understand that every single person you come in contact with has a right and responsibility to be treated like royalty.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think I lost that along the way in my career.
Mhm. Have you seen Hotel Mumbai? I think that's how you say the name, the movie. Because
So
I
good.
think they talk about that concept in the movie too, where the terrorists are out there, but I think it was the head chef
Yep.
that said, we need to protect our guests because they are gods to us.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that translates. So, I mean, if in a world that is so divisive as of now, I think if we come back to the basic core tenets of morality and just say, listen, we're gonna have disagreements. I always say conflict is inevitable, but disunity is unacceptable. And if we have the notion that we're always going to be in conflict, but if we look at that person as the incarnation of God, look at that person as this guest who needs to be revered. If we all did that, our world would drastically change in a heartbeat.
Yeah. I think that, so my background, I have a master's in Christian education. And, one of the things that I have taught students is being, if you follow Jesus, the concept literally is he's living inside of you. So this concept of treating people as
Mm,
gods is that, like, if God is living in you, like, and we are a reflection of who God is, we should be loving each other in that manner. Um, and therefore, yeah, you would, doesn't mean you have to agree with everybody on every single point of everything. It's how you
totally.
treat people. I mean, if you really read the Bible, it says love your enemies. So even more so, we
Mhm.
should be doing that. Um, so as you've encountered, like living in America, learning about the subcontinent, so many cultures, you've also seen faith expressed differently in different ways. Has any faith or belief system affected the way you live your life, you do your cooking, just informed your outlook in life?
Yeah, most definitely. I think that a lot of things in life, it's about finding things that connect with you, right? And understanding that connections change as you gain wisdom and gain years, like I have. You don't get grazed for nothing. um and so I think that for me, one of the first things that I noticed is being in a state of mind that's a lot kind of more meditative. For instance, when I would go cook with Indra, it would be early mornings, and morning pujas or prayers would be playing. Her father was a Hindu priest. So it was clearly walking in there, everything was veg. There was no meat that would ever come in there. There was a lot of those things, but the chants and the prayers and the incense and all of those things in the beginning were very foreign to me, right? Like I'm a Westerner who grew up in the West. But over time, I learned to have this deep reverence with them. And even though I don't identify as somebody who is Hindu, I certainly have so much deep love and respect. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is I can be in the midst of anyone who believes in a religion and still honor, love, and respect that, and really find reverence and beauty in all of those things. Just because I don't identify as one religion or another doesn't mean that those people are any less. They have the right and ability and to express that in a way that's respectful to everyone around. And that was the biggest takeaway. And so even in Aatma now, what we do is we honor that tradition by lighting incense, and we have like kind of like prayers that play. And it's it's not that I'm praying to a god. It's that it's this level of clearing our mind. A lot of times in a kitchen, you hear hard rock, you hear metal, you hear like amped up music. And in our kitchen, it's very opposite. We'll play opera a lot. We'll play different things that are calming because we believe, thanks to Indra passing on that lesson, that what we feel in our mind goes into our food.
Mhm. Yeah, that's amazing. Um, and I feel like this whole sense of, there is hustle and there's hard work and there's sacrifice. That's normal. But if we can get to a place in whatever our work is and whatever our calling is, where we come to it filled up, versus, I don't know, like I like hype music too. I like it
Yeah,
hype too. But no, I totally get what you're saying, because then it's what she was teaching you about, like the love that you're pouring into the food. But if you're stressed out of like, and chaotic, that's what it is. You can be busy and not be chaotic.
perfectly said. And like in the kitchen, all we are is surrounded by chaos, right? And we have to make the decision at a young age. We're either going to observe this chaos or we're going to become the chaos. And far too often in our industry, a lot of chefs and young cooks become the chaos, and it
Mm,
leads to a lot of destructive behavior. And it happened in my life as well.
wow. So I know you've been trying to get to India.
Ugh.
It's going to happen, but tell me, like, what are your expectations when you finally get
Um, None. Really, like when you study something for so long, um, you have an idea of what's in your head. And I think my idea is my only expectation is, God willing, I just can't wait to hug Kurosh and say thank you.
there?
Like I really mean that. Like, him just deciding one night after one of his classes that he wanted to talk to me on FaceTime radically changed the course of my life. And to be able to call him friend and teacher means so much. So to be able to repay that and to sit there and to have food with him and have chai and, like these memories, like that's what I want. I also understand India is India, and it is this beautiful symphony of controlled chaos that is life times a million. And I respect that and I honor that and I love that. So I know that if I set my expectations of I want to do this and this and this, you can lead to a lot of disappointment. So I think as long as I get to have that moment, that's all I need. Everything
Yeah,
else will just be great after that.
I think you're very wise to go in like that, because every time I've gone, it's always been different. And India continues to evolve as well. So it's not going to be the same as like the last time I went. And because the culture is so much of, you may plan to do something at 4 o'clock. It may happen at 5 o'clock. It may happen at 8 o'clock. It may not happen at all. And you just kind of go with it. So yeah, holding loosely is a wise way to go about it.
Yeah, I have a friend, and when I was in college, and he was from Pakistan, and I would say, what's the biggest thing that you realize like coming over here? And he's like, Americans fear one thing more than anything else. I was like, what's that? He's like, inconvenience. And it
Yeah,
always stuck with me. And so that's why when I go over there, whatever happens, it's meant to be.
yeah, that's really good advice. So Keith, you are doing this documentary, which I'm really excited to hear about. Can you tell us some more about it, what your expectations are, and yeah, how and why are you making this documentary?
Sure. Yeah, so the documentary is called Finding India, and it really started as a journey to kind of showcase what I've been learning and going through. But more than anything, the reason it's called Finding India is I lost a lot when my mom died. When she passed, I lost parts of me I didn't even know existed. I felt like I was in a daze. I was her primary caregiver. We didn't have a lot of family, so nobody came out and helped. So trying to understand what end of life looks like, and trying to understand what, oncology appointments look like on top of opening a business and writing a second cookbook and all of these things, like I didn't really, nobody teaches you this stuff. And so um I lost a lot of me, and I found it in the weirdest place. I found it in studying food from India. Um and I found it in Indra, in her teachings, and how she, you know, her simple, hey, it's going to be okay. Her simple, I knew your mom. She was such a wonderful lady. Like her words of encouragement. I found it in understanding that my mom had this huge heart who loved everyone, and she was just such a good human being. And I wanted to make sure that that legacy lived on. And so, cooking was always this thing that she always admired about me in my journey. And so I think that's really what Finding India was. It's about talking about, the loss, and also how just because you lose something doesn't mean it's gone forever. I found it in studying food from the subcontinent. So that's really what it's about. And the way that I do it is I have some wonderful friends all across the United States and really the world now that I wanted them to tell their story. And it's the simple premise of we sit down and say, what does Indian food mean to you? So my good friend, James Beard Award winner, Chintan Pandya from Dhamaka in New York, and we sat down with him in Sama, and I looked at him and I was like, what is Indian food? How do we define this? Right.
Mhm.
I looked at Chef Vijay Kumar, from Sama, and same thing, like, chef, like, how do you define Indian food? Because Chintan's Gujarati and Vijay is not Gujarati, he's from the South. And so like you have these two very different cultures with two very similar answers that it cannot be defined, it can only be experienced. And so that's really where the documentary is going. And it's a lot of work filming a documentary, but I'm so freaking lucky that I get just to have this opportunity. So yeah, I'm blessed.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to, like, when you first told me you were filming, I'm like, that sounds so cool. And then you went to Jackson Heights, and it was like, I grew up going to Jackson Heights because that's where we would get our spices. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really fun to hear that you have this opportunity to film and to hear these stories and kind of continue this healing process you have as an individual. And yeah, your mom sounds amazing, and I'm so sorry for your loss. And I feel like you're really honoring her by doing this, of what I feel like when there is loss, when it can be redeemed and it can be used. And so even though you miss her and she was well loved, this is going to live on, forever. So I'm so glad that you get to do this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So you have Aatma, which is your pop-up, but you had restaurants before. What made you give up those restaurants?
Yeah, restaurant world's really difficult. And I was really lucky that I have, a wonderful business partner and my friend Chris. We opened our first restaurant, Greenleaf, in 2019. And I own a company called The Farmer's Dinner, where we do these gorgeous dinners on farms all across New England. So Greenleaf was really an extension of that. 2019, the beginning of it, we open it, we crush it. We win best restaurant in the state out the gate. We're profitable. We're doing great. But I would always find myself connecting. My job there wasn't the chef. I was, Chris is an incredible chef too. So we made the decision very early on. He was going to handle the food. I was going to handle the marketing and operations and the branding. So I would find myself making chai for everyone in the back. I would find myself in staff meal making these like simple, humble dishes like pongal. Pongal and gotsu, like that's my like love language dish. I make pongal all the time. Um,
Can you explain what that is? That's
sure.
that's not my
So
people's food. I don't know what that is.
Pongal is it's kind of a South Indian breakfast. It's similar in the ways of khichdi that in the north, but in south it's basically mung dal and I use sona masuri rice. You have ginger, you have beautiful toasted cashews to it, and if you're offering it to the gods, you don't put in green mirchi or green chilies. Ghee based, it's just wonderful. It's simple, easy. Kind of has this oatmeal like feel to me, but the gotsu that you put on it can be tamarind based, it can be and it's this wonderful sauce that just goes on it. It is a very simple breakfast, but I will say that, like, to me it's like chicken noodle soup. It for us Westerners, it just hits different. So I would make dishes like that. I would make dishes like chetana chicken and like little things like this that were complex, and people are like, what are you doing? Like, this is insane. I realized in those moments I just wasn't happy, right?
Mm.
Like, I realized in those moments I had what I thought I wanted my whole life. I was a restaurant owner of a successful restaurant, 125 seats. We were packed. I had it all. Like, I didn't need money. I didn't need anything. That was it. But a lot of times we don't realize that it's not the destination we want, it's the journey. And I became unhappy, and my business owner saw it. Chris, he was like, dude, you're not happy. And I was like, you're right, man. I'm a chef. I want to cook. I want to showcase this stuff. So I sold out to him. I was like, I'm done. And I went home that day and had no job. I left it all. And
Wow.
I knew in that moment that I wanted the universe to just provide people in my path to help me understand the next level. So
Mm.
from 2019 to, really 2021, those 2-year period, I studied with Kurush intensively, met Ragini, would take every class. I mean, 70 hours a week, I was studying Hindi, I was reading books, I would like nonstop. And that's how Atma came. It came from that.
Wow, that is super bold, but I feel like it came out of self-awareness that if you can identify like how you're reacting to things and how you're feeling and make that bold choice, you're not going to see immediately the ramifications. It was a long process, and that you were willing to have that patience to be okay with that.
Yeah, it was really scary. Like I went through a lot. It was loss again, right? Like, just I've wanted this restaurant for so long, and I was grieving the loss of my mother still, because she passed in 2018. I was grieving the loss of a restaurant. I was grieving the loss of the end of a relationship in my life. Like it was a lot of loss, loss, loss. And so there's no doubt that finding India came from the parallel of that loss. You can't you life isn't always lost and it's not always winning. So that finding part has been this key point in my life where it's just been this beautiful ride, uh, tumultuous and all.
I feel like a lot of people um, think about, oh, I want to go into culinary. I'm going to go to CIA. I want to have this restaurant. I want to get a Michelin star. I want to get a James Beard. And this like these concrete goals. But what I hear you saying is that like none of that matters if you're not feeling fulfilled as a person and you're just going, going, going. And so it's really neat to hear how your journey is going now, because you seem pretty happy.
Yeah, I looked at my girlfriend the other day and I was like, if this is all that life is, I'm okay.
Mm,
It's the first time I've ever been able to say that. You know,
that's amazing.
I have 3 beautiful dogs. I'm in this really great relationship with this woman who's just amazing and inspires me all the time. Like I get to showcase my passion, food from the subcontinent. Like that's I'm okay. And anything from here, it just gets better.
Yeah, that's amazing. So then, based on what you've learned in life and where you are now, do you have any specific long-term goals that you're trying to race to?
Yeah, I think at this point in my career, I have a lot more that I want to do, right? I know that Aatma needs to be a brick and mortar where we open a restaurant based off of the concept of we want to showcase regional food. We want to do chef's tastings with an open concept kitchen where you are sitting here watching the action and we get to tell the story of the food that we love so much. To me, I don't want somebody to just eat food and pay money. I want them to leave feeling like they got a history lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, that's where we connect. We connect with food, no doubt. But if you can connect with the food and history, and again, we can't talk about food without talking about the dark side of history, which I think
Right.
is important. But when we put reverence on that, then it changes somebody's perception forever. So I think Atma, being a brick and mortar is important. I eventually am going to write a book based off of Finding India, where it's more an experiential journey of other people's
Mm,
lives so that we can see that scarlet thread has always been food. But like you said so eloquently, it's about soul, right?
yeah, I agree. That sounds awesome. So you have a French side to you, though. Do you ever feel like, you know what? I just want to make croissants or like classical French food, and I think that's what's interesting. One of the shows that I worked on, the contestants were told to make a fine dining meal. And one of the contestants made an Asian-based meal where there was braising and I forget how she did it, but a sauce that should have taken hours. She like did it quicker, but she like took the steak and like cut it up. By the end, when she was getting judged, she was told, this tastes delicious, but it's not really fine dining. And
Mm.
I watched that. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, because it's not a steak that's been like basted in butter, and that's why it's not fine dining. And so where was I going with this question? So
I
like
love it
French
though.
influence. Oh, the French influence in America of in the culinary scene, with Julia Child and everybody learning how to eat. How do you ever feel like, sometimes I just want to do like French because it's like actually in my DNA? Or are you like, no, like I'm a global citizen and this is what I'm doing now?
Yeah, there's certainly things I crave, right? Like, I would say like beef bourguignon is like this great thing that is just basically beef stew with some red wine, right? Like it's
Mhm,
just like
mhm.
it's a super fancy way of doing it. But I think that to answer the question, it's two parts. One, I hate the paradigm of what fine dining has represented for the last 200 plus years in European culture, right? It's represented this brigade system where a lot of people coming up think that the French have created the brigade system, yet the Mughal Empire did this way before the French did this.
Mhm.
You had Persian influence that dates back so much farther than the French fine dining influence. Food doesn't belong to anyone, and that's the beauty of food. If you were to think about the modern look of America has no cuisine, right? America, what really made America great is one thing: it's a melting pot.
Mhm.
It's cultures coming together to share on the concept of this is freedom. This is what we want to do. We want to be able to share freely. That's really what makes America great in its DNA. So to look at what is authentic in Indian or any cuisine, nothing authentic exists. Authenticity is this myth that we rally around to rest on our laurels. But the reality is, when we really research food history, tomatoes don't belong to India.
Right.
Aloo, potato doesn't belong to India. Cauliflower doesn't belong to India. Carrot doesn't belong to India. Mirchi, that chilies don't belong to India. Like, and understand that I say just because it doesn't belong to India, like we look at every culture. We have like if we split hairs over that, it just makes no sense. So I certainly want to make, French dishes once in a while, but most of my career was that.
Yeah.
So like most of my career was doing that food. And of course, I'm a white French guy. They want me to make French food. But the more that we break the paradigm and realize that the beauty is when people are passionate about the cuisine and honor the history and the culture of it, that's who should be cooking that cuisine.
I love that. That's so well said. Because I look like this, people have an expectation that I'm going to cook Indian food, and I've morphed into that. And I've actually found a platform to talk about India, especially living in the South, where people are really unfamiliar about the subcontinent. But you should really try my jambalaya, and you should try my biscuits
Hell
and
yeah.
gravy, because
Yeah.
and that was an adaptation to living in the South. Like, this is how we cook. I'm collecting my bacon grease now, and so I am American and I am Indian, and I cook everything and I eat everything,
I
um,
love that.
because
But
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but like what you just said is the epitome of really what makes this world great. Like people have expectations of you looking like you and me looking like me. But I
mhm,
think of chefs like Gagan Anand, and he got his start because somebody was like, "Hey, there's this Indian guy over here making pasta," and then the first response to the critics were like, "Well, is it good?
yeah.
You need to try it." And like it didn't fit the mold. I don't fit the mold to be somebody who's passionate about Indian cuisine. You might
Mhm.
not fit the mold for jambalaya, but guess what? If you're passionate about it and you do the job with it, I bet you your jambalaya is better than many people who live there.
If it is, it's the love that I put into it too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, serious question. Do
Yeah.
you have a curry plant?
Oh yeah. I posted on Instagram the other day. So I live in New England and it's a tundra for 6 months out of the year. So keeping a curry plant has been our like biggest thing ever. And my girlfriend's got a really good green thumb. So this year we kept it alive. We kept it alive and it's now sprouting new growth. So yes.
Yay. Yeah, mine, I had to cut some back. I just talked to Sam Ford the other day and asked her about her plant. She says every year she cuts it all the way back to no
Really?
leaves. I was like, really? She's like, I do, but it comes back. I'm like, I don't know if I could do that. That's
Yeah.
extreme.
That's scary to me because we just got new growth. Like everyone we've had dies because like we're trying to find the right area for it in the house. Right outside right now, it's spring and it's just starting to get to 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah,
So
I'm waiting. But it makes sense because if you do cut it all the way back and you collect all those seeds and dry it and then you grind it up, then it didn't go to waste, and you just have to have faith it is going to come back.
trust, right? Trust and faith.
All right, another important question. Beverage of choice: chai, tea, coffee, something else?
This is a horrible question because it's like it great. So there's a time and a place for all of it. If I have to choose one, please don't hate me, but coffee, like South Indian filter coffee, is
Yep.
just it's a whole other
Oh,
level
why
of
would I hate you?
delicious.
That's my people. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what we drink.
But I feel like chai is that predominant chai in the north, obviously, even more
Mhm.
predominant. But yeah, coffee is just
Yeah. It's funny because I grew up in church and that's what we would have. They'd make this huge vat of it and they'd cook the milk and the sugar with the coffee. And
what?
so after church, so like the men of the church had to go and like make the coffee for afterward. And really it was just like men hanging out, in the basement. But the taste of it is not, you can't get that in Dunkin' Donuts or
No.
like, it's completely different.
Completely, and it's like I get like chills thinking about it because I have two different filter coffees. I work with this company called Ministry of Copy, great company, and
Mm,
like I am like I'm straight obsessed with getting like the perfect cup. Oh,
that's great. Um, we're starting to close, knowing everything you know now, what would you say to 18-year-old Keith based on your life?
um love this question. um I would say I'm sorry I'm late. I feel like a lot of my life was looking. I try, when you grow up without a dad, you try to figure out what it means to be a man. And I think a lot of times I was searching for something that I already had. And so I think I would say, I'm sorry I'm late. Buckle in, we're going for a ride.
Mm.
Um, I would tell that kid uh, to make sure that he cherishes every moment with his mom. But don't change a lot. There was a good person there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ah. And if there is something that your listeners need to know, if they are hesitant about making a bold move, what would you say to them?
Um, Ships are built to withstand waves. They're not made to stay on the shore.
Mm.
And I think about that a lot. It's scary to make bold moves, and it should be scary. Waves can be scary when there's a storm at sea. But just like you alluded to, you have to have trust and faith that all things work to good. And I think at the end of the day, like if we believe that we are victors in this world rather than victims, and we set our sails and believe that we're going to make this journey, then it happens. Life gives you everything that you need, not everything that we want.
Mhm. That's great. I feel like also it comes in seasons too. Like you can't do everything today. You don't need everything today, but
No,
you've got a few years to live. So it's okay to spread it out. That's
yeah, I
amazing.
totally agree. And that's the beauty of it. Like it really is about that journey rather than the destination. Because oftentimes we get the thing that we want, and just like when we're kids and we get that new toy, it becomes passe and it becomes something that we then forget about. But
Mhm.
it's the journey to get there that matters more than anything else.
That's great. Well, Keith, we're going to wrap up. Do you have anything that you would like to share that's coming up that people can get to know you more or find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, just stay in touch. All the social media info will be here. I love talking to people, so share your story too. And that's how we met. And honestly, it's been an honor today. I like all kidding aside, thank you so much, really.
This has been so encouraging for me. Not what I expected. I'm like, I'm so grateful, like, to get to know people who like live their life with intention and purpose and kindness. Like,
Mhm.
you just have like made my day. So thank you so much.
Same. You're the best.
So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Please head over to our website where you can find all the links from today's show. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Being Brown and Bold. We will be right back here next week to drop our next episode. Till then, be wise and be bold.